can only imagine when that day comes.
How many Psalms are there? That's right, 150. Thank you, sir. That's exactly right. Just checking. Middle of the Bible, that's right. Pretty much, if you want to, and that's the exact middle, and the one you've got. Some of them are printed up a little different, but usually if you're trying to find a book in the Bible, open it about halfway, you'll be in Psalms, and then you can go back and forth. It's just kind of a crib tool. We had a young man at Fred Hardeman when I was there. He'd gone to Mars Hill Bible School in Alabama, and K through 12. That's been there a long, long time. But he could take his Bible, they practiced doing this, and just usually open it up pretty much to wherever he wanted to be. It was just, and he said, if you just practice at it a little bit every day, you'll get that familiar with it. But he said you got to use the same Bible all the time because there are some are big, little, and all that. So but that's what he did. And I can't remember that young man's name, but he was a really good student and a fine Christian young man. We were in Psalm 25, but as we began to finish that, I want us to have a word of prayer. Would you bow with me? Lord, we're grateful for this new day and the beauty of the day. We're grateful for the abundant blessings that you shower upon us, and from a material as well as a spiritual standpoint. And we're grateful for each other and for the opportunity that we have to be together. We pray that you bless our study. We're thankful for those servants of yours, some known to us, some not, that have given us these beautiful psalms, and for the admonition and that they bring to us, as well as assisting in praise of your name. Continue with us this day, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. We began and looked at the major theme of Psalm 25 is piety portrayed. What does a pious, godly person do? Well, he trusts in God, verses 1 through 3. And he seeks God's ways, verses 4 and 5. And he acknowledges sin. He doesn't try to make excuses for it. He acknowledges it and makes correction thereof. And then we'd come to the last section, and or not the last section, next to last section, and we're talking about praising God. And I'd gotten pretty well through that. You know, it was an acrostic, and there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and so each idea began with another letter. Now, they deviated from that just a little bit. There was a couple of letters they used twice, and a couple of letters they didn't use. Why did the psalmist do that? I'm sure I don't know. But that's the way he set it up. And so then you come to verses 12 through 15, where he's going to talk to us about reverencing God in a proper way. And so I wanted to read that. After 11, he said, for your name's sake, O Lord, pardon my iniquity, for it is great. So he's trying to get that out of the way. Who is the man who fears the Lord? Verse 12, he will instruct him in the way he should choose. His soul will abide in prosperity, and his descendants will inherit the land. The secret of the Lord is for those who fear him, and he will make them know his covenant. My eyes are continually toward the Lord, for he will pluck my feet out of the net. Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. The troubles of my heart enlarged. Bring me out of my distresses. Look upon my affliction and my trouble, and forgive all my sins. Look upon my enemies, for they are many, and they hate me with violent hatred. Guard my soul and deliver me. Do not let me be ashamed, for I take refuge in you. Let integrity and uprightness preserve me, for I wait for you. Out of all his troubles, redeem, O Israel. I'll get it in a moment, pardon me. Redeem Israel, O God, out of all his troubles. And so, to reverence God is a thing that I wish we could get back too. I think that we're too casual sometimes, and not so much in the way we dress, sometimes in the way we dress ourselves. You can just go off to extremes, but casual in our attitude. And I believe I'd mentioned last time our son being out in a pretty large congregation out in Lubbock near the school out there, Lubbock Christian, when a guy was asked to lead prayer and comes up before the audience and says, "Hey, Dad, you don't, or you should not address Jehovah in an almost flippant way." And it wasn't the word dad so much as it was the attitude that the man presented that was so, Scripture says Abba, Father. Abba's it's a real endearment term. But to be that casual with God is shocking. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a certain amount of decorum and dignity and respect he is due. In fact, he's due all the respect that there's possible, that it's possible to render. And so, yeah, absolutely. And in fact, we're going to see that here in 26 some. But in verse 12, come back to the reading, the acrostic letters and mem. Who is the man who fears the Lord? And so he designates the benefit that God gives to those who revere him. The word fear can be translated revere. There are 4 benefits that he talks about. The first one is instruction. And he will instruct him in the way that he should choose. See, that man's got a heart that's open, doesn't he? I mean, he would instruct anybody today, but you got to bring, what do you bring to it? You've got to bring an open heart. God will help him know the truth providentially by assisting him to see the path that he should follow. And that works on a level that we can't perceive, that it's not sensory, but he just says he does it. And, I can think back different people that came into my life at significant times when I needed, because I was on a search. And I suspect that you can too. We can all look back on people that God had, servants of him, that he used, or circumstances. I tell the story of running out of money one year going to college and having to stay home. And then weren't any jobs. And so I just picked up day work for a year, worked every day, because when it got around that somebody would work, you're going to have work. There'd be carpenters, farmers, different ones that need somebody just to help them, And it turned out to be a pivotal year for me. And it looked like the worst disaster on one end, but looking at it 50-some years later, it was actually a key thing, because then I was home all the time, so I was going to church and got to meet the preacher. And I mean, this is not anything miraculous or anything like that, but he befriended me, and I'd never heard of Fred Hardeman University. That's how protected I was. So he said, set up the arrangement and all that, said, we're going to go up there. We're going to drive up there and talk to him. And so, you just look back and think, God's got agents all over the place that he'll use. And so he said he'll provide instruction. Of course, undergirding that is somebody that goes out looking for it. Instruct him in the way that he should choose. He'll help him know the truth. Verse 13, the acrostic is nun, I believe is somewhere close to where they pronounce it, the Hebrew. And the second blessing is personal prosperity. Of course, this is to the people that are in covenant with him in the Old Testament. His soul will abide in prosperity and the good favors of God. Soul probably designates the individual being. And the word prosperity is a translation of the Hebrew word, he will be in good. It's an expansive kind of word. And he will enjoy grace, he will enjoy goodness of all kinds during his days upon the earth. The third one is posterity, not prosperity, but posterity, which is what? Yeah, young'uns and grandyoung'uns. Again, I look at the world that we're in and people's attitude. I'll hear people sometimes, it just hurts my heart, say, well, my kid turns 18, he's out or she's out. I'm going to spend that money on myself is what they're saying. And you might have said it, but it just makes my skin crawl. I'll help my children as long as I live. And I don't mean help them be irresponsible, but they need help. I would render that aid if it was at all possible to do it. Just like the rest of the family. That's blood. And so he's going to have descendants, and then his descendants will inherit the land. Of course, a lot of that's going to have to do with what he taught them, but he will be granted meaningful offspring. Sons and daughters will have the hand of the Lord upon them. And under the influence of the man that fears the Lord, his children will, through the spirit of godliness, see the goodness of God. Verse 14, the acrostic letter is, I can't pronounce it. It's a Hebrew letter. Looks like kind of like an O. But it's not. The fourth blessing is a deep and personal walk with God. It says the secret of the Lord is for those who fear him. And the word secret comes from secret counsel. And what it suggests is intimate communication of close friends. I've got a couple of friends that I've known since I was in the first grade, and one of them's still alive, rather. And we don't even have to talk sometimes to communicate because we know one another that long and that well. And so that is not secret like it's top secret from, you think about government secrets and what have you. Of course, they can't, they look like a sieve, man. I'm not so sure they got any real secrets, but that's my opinion. But God has some things that are private that he shares with his people. And the man that fears the Lord will enjoy that covenant relationship. Moses saw some aspects of God that those who were not as close to the Lord didn't get to see. And so did Paul. And so did Peter. And so did John. You think of the ones that he took with him to the Mount of Transfiguration. And so the man who fears the Lord is going to enjoy that covenant relationship with him. And this relationship means a special, revealing friendship with the Lord. He will make them to know his covenant. And the covenant's not merely a contractual agreement offering rewards in return for obedience. It is a privileged and close relationship with the Lord. There are blessings that he offers, aren't there? But beyond that is just the relationship, then the closeness of that relationship. My eyes are continually toward the Lord. That's verse 15, he says, for he will pluck my feet out of the net. The eyes of the heart is what he's talking about. Of a pious person are continually fixed upon the Lord, his will, his way. And this person's habitual state of mind is being indicated. His life is as absorbed. It is dominated thinking of the Lord, praying to the Lord, seeking the will of the Lord, longing for his fellowship, and walking in his way. The writer's mind is calmed by the realization that God cares for him. We're going to look at today Psalm says, when you think about what all God has done, David asked the question, who is man that you are, concerned about him? What did they say? They caught a radio signal from a star cluster that is, I forget how far away it's supposed to be. I mean, billions of light years, meaning that it took that signal that long to travel from where it originated to where we are. I don't know how much of that I buy. In fact, I don't buy very much of it because it assumes that everything has always gone on like it's going now. And that's a really big assumption, isn't it? That's a really big assumption. When you start talking about time and it took, whenever the Lord started, it took a week, 7 days, morning and evening. The markers in Genesis are morning and evening. It was the first day. Morning and evening, it was the second day. That's how long it took. Now, exactly when that started, I don't know. But the model that is popular among the scientific community is open to question. The writer's mind is calmed by the realization that God cares for him and that he cares for everybody who loves him. And his enemies are not going to be able to entrap him, for God's going to bring his feet out of the snares. He's not been caught by their devices yet, and he believes that God will prevent them from overtaking him in the future. And in verses 16 through 22 that we already read, he ends up with hoping, putting his hope, his trust in the Lord. Verse 16, the letter Pe, the writer turns once more to petition. And he's looking to God as his only hope. And he says, turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. So he calls upon God to look at him, to take notice at him, and to cover him with his grace, because he's feeling vulnerable. He says that he's without friends, he's desolate and alone, afflicted and hurting. Been there and done that, and you have too. And so where does he take it? Well, he takes it to the one that can bring comfort, can offer protection. He needs God as his refuge. He needs the Lord as his strength. Who do you need? Say, who do I need? Well, we need the same thing that the psalmist does, because we hit those places in the road, and if you haven't, I can just near about guarantee you will before you get through here. Man is a few days and full of trouble. That observation I have found to be correct. And the reason there are troubles and all of that is because, as Leroy Brownlow described it one time, Adam and Eve wanted to change a diet. And said, the world's been suffering from indigestion ever since. Well, that was kind of comical in a way, but it was really true. And so he's in this affliction and knows who to go to. Verse 17, it's the next letter in the alphabet. It's Tasada, something like that, or Sadeh. The heaviness of his heart becomes greater when he thinks about his sins. Sometimes you'll get people, and I hate to see this, that are Christian people, but they like to brag about what a torment raiser they were, Well, I haven't always been the way I am now, but I'm not happy about it and not going to run out and put on a big production about what a stinker I used to be and, how great I am now. I think it's inappropriate. A person ought to be ashamed. This man's ashamed. He's talking to God. He's not out strolling that all over the countryside. He is acknowledging to the Lord that the troubles of my heart are enlarged, he says, because he's contributed to that. And perhaps his troubles have been brought about in some way by his sin, by his own foolishness. Anybody here ever not made a foolish mistake? And I heard Brother Townley say one time, observing the way people are, said, there ain't no fool like an old fool. You know, it's bad to make one in youth, but it's really bad to do it when you know better. You look at a good man like David, but he saw Bathsheba and he wondered. Now, he was old enough to know better than that. He knew better than that. And then, oh no, you know how sin does, blows up. And he's got to do something about Uriah. And Uriah is loyal where David wasn't and ends up being participant in the murder of the man. That's where it can go. It can just blow up in your face. I don't know what happened to the psalmist, what he's referring to here, but he asked for God to deliver him from his troubles. Bring me out of my distresses, he says. He's penitent about it. Then in verse 18, he skips the word he uses, the letter. It's something like kof. He uses resh instead. Look upon my affliction and my trouble. Forgive all my sins. Special concern then for his sins is seen throughout the psalm. He's well aware of that. And he brings these things before God 3 times. Verse 7, verse 11, and verse 18. God is a forgiving God, and he obviously is a penitent man. He was probably, that was forgiven at verse 7, but he hadn't forgotten it. I don't know if you have some memories that just hurt you every time they come to the surface. I suspect everybody that's very honest does. And so he brings these things to the Lord because he's ashamed of them and he wants to be absolved of it. And the heart of the psalm is this 2-part petition. Forgive me of my sins and deliver me from my enemies that have gathered around me. And so he's in trouble. Verse 19, the letter resh is repeated. Look upon my enemies, for they are many, and they hate me with violent hatred. Many enemies, no doubt, are near him, moving toward him and probably seeking to kill him, and he asks God to rescue him. This is not on that level, but I saw something this week where a young hockey player, apparently he was born originally in Russia, I think he's a Canadian citizen, but they decided the team decided they were going to wear a rainbow jersey and celebrate the LGBTQ community. Well, this man, I don't know who he's associated with, but he's Christian in his orientation. And what he said was, I respect everybody's right to choose and the choice that they made, but I'm going to be true to myself and true to my religion, and I choose not to participate. Well, I heard some person get on there. There's someone at the door. I heard a guy get on there, a news announcer, and I mean, the man went wild. And so it's astounding that these folks that talk a lot about inclusion didn't want to include this young man. He didn't. All he said was, I choose not to participate. And so he acquired some enemies, is what I'm saying. And they're very ugly in the things that they said. And I'm sure going out of that he probably received threats and everything else. Well, that's the world that we're in. And so the psalmist has a group of enemies that he has reason to believe are violent, and they're near him, moving toward him, and he's concerned about it. Verse 20, guard my soul and deliver me. Do not let me be ashamed, for I take refuge in you. He's subtle and respectful, but the point, of course, cannot be missed. The Lord certainly wouldn't miss it. If those guys succeed in destroying the psalmist, his refuge in God is going to get the blame. And he's put his future in God's hands. And so he's, in a very gentle way, reminding the Lord, now I'm your guy, and I need your help. And, of course, no doubt God delivered that help. And this is in the Bible. You might would think, well, can anybody talk in that way? Well, somebody that's in covenant with the Lord, somebody who is a friend of God, can speak to him in that way. He didn't speak disrespectfully, but like, Lord, I'm in trouble now, and I need your help. And there wasn't anybody else that could help him, apparently. In verse 22, the letter Peh is used a second time. 19 letters in the Hebrew alphabet have been used thus far, with the letter looks like P-E is the way they write it in English, and R-E-S-H. I'm pronouncing it Peh and Resh. Those are used twice. And then there's one line that's not part of that acrostic scheme. And so when you come down and set all that, say you got 22 lines to match up with the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. The concluding petition is, redeem Israel, O God, out of all his troubles. And thus the psalm closes with a prayer for redemption for his people generally. And it's a beautiful psalm. Psalm 26 we'll come to is under the theme living with integrity. Integrity is a very important concept. And that's another one. There used to be a song, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. You remember that one? That's a good song. But what the world needs now is some integrity. I saw this morning just a push. I don't know the circumstances, and it's a bad thing whenever the authorities have to take the life of a citizen. But there's rioting and burning stuff down in the city of Atlanta, and what they're portraying, at least, is that this man was involved with the police and refused lawful orders and shot at some state troopers, and he was killed. And so they're trying to burn the town down. I'm just a country preacher, but that, if you shoot at the police, at least in Texas, what can you expect? That they're going to respond with deadly force. And so, like I say, I don't know all the circumstances, but I thought, people don't seem to understand it, and God tells us to obey the authorities in matters like that. If a policeman tells you you're under arrest, what does that mean? At that moment, at that very instance, he may or may not want to put cuffs on you. Generally speaking, they're going to do that till they know it's going to be safe for them and everybody else. But that's not time to start popping attitude and arguing.
And the term arrest means stop.
Yeah.
Like cardiac arrest.
That's right.
That means quit right now.
Yeah. What's going on is now over until we get this sorted out. And but people today don't seem to. Who doesn't know that? I'm not going to argue with a policeman. Guy's got a gun on his hip and a star on his chest. And it don't matter if he's black, white, tall, short, fat, skinny. That doesn't matter. He represents the law at that point. And we used to have a brother here, was an old retired Houston cop. And when they started Mirandizing people, his Mirandizing was you got the right to remain silent. That was it. But what he would say to somebody, if they started trying to, he said, look, you're under arrest, you're going to the station, you're going to get a chance to tell the judge. So tell him, because I can't help you with that. And that's true. And so he's going to present why he brought the person in, and then the judge is going to decide whether it's merit or not. But at any rate, I stray a little bit, but I'm talking about living with integrity and living in the right kind of way, and that's what this psalm's about. Yeah. He really messed up big time, and I don't know when he wrote it. But he could have written that after that incident because he repented and God forgave him clearly. And so, if David can be forgiving, I suspect everybody in this house can be forgiven. Not to minimize anything anybody's done wrong, but I mean, if David could be forgiven, if Paul, Saul of Tarsus, could be forgiven, you think there's a chance for all of us? In fact, that's why Paul said what he did. That he saves sinners, of whom I am what? Chief, or foremost. He saw himself as that. And now he wasn't bragging about it, but what he was saying was, look, if he would have me, he'll have you. Well, this is a touching verse. Psalm 26 is a touching and very popular psalm, and it emphasizes the concept of integrity with a literary device called inclusio format. It begins with the quality, I have walked in my integrity, and it ends with that. I shall walk in my integrity. And so he's chosen spiritual genuineness to be his way of life as we get into it. And in light of its content, we could call this piece a psalm of innocence. Bewilderment, we're going to see, has descended upon the psalmist because he's been accused of being a hypocrite. And he adamantly recoiled at those insinuations and earnestly besought God to judge him and to make known his blamelessness at this point in his life. You know, even when David committed that sin, who did God send to confront him? It was the prophet Nathan, wasn't it? And Nathan tells him about the story about the poor man that's got the little lamb, and the rich man takes his lamb and all that. And David, being David, he was a hot-blooded, passionate kind of individual, said, man that did that, he's ready to go after him. And David, and I'll cite it the way the King James says it, Nathan looked at him and said, thou art the man. Well, then David had him executed, right? No, broke his heart. Because he knew what Nathan told him was exactly right. And he understood. And you read Psalm 51, and you see penitence. He owned it, and he did something about it. But at this point, he's been accused of something that he hadn't done that. Because what we know of his history, when he sinned, he repented and turned away from it. And so he is recoiled at these insinuations, and he's begging God to judge him, make it known. And he lists the evidence that confirms his righteousness, as we'll see, and proves that he shouldn't be grouped with these evildoers. And because of this psalm's exposition of this theme, it's a crucial theme. It's become a thorough illustration of honesty and how honesty is demonstrated in life and in worship of a devout believer. And there's no psalm in the 150 that we have that addresses the topic of integrity quite the way this one does. As defined in this context, a scholar by the name of A.F. Kirkpatrick said integrity is sincerity of purpose and single-heartedness of devotion to God. A scholar by the name of H.C. Leupold said that it was conduct for which no essential element, or from which no essential element is missing. So whether we call it serving God sincerely or constantly or consistently, living in a godly way, the basic thought of the attribute of integrity is that the motivations of the heart and the actions that are taken ought to match one another. And devoted sincerity, not flawlessness, faithfulness. Integrity has to do with more than a person's reputation. It concerns following what he or she knows to be true and right. You know, we had a fellow here that was a trainer with the football team. I knew him and seemed like a really nice guy. It turned out that he would, if I remember correctly what he was convicted of, he drugged some of those boys and assault him sexually. And he drew a large, long prison sentence as a result of that, and I suspect he's still in. It's been several years ago that happened. The only reason I say that is because there was nothing about that man that would have revealed that kind of darkness. He was involved in one of the local churches, not this one, except in some ways. I mean, something like that, it's terrible. It's terrible that it was there. And they don't condone it. And so to be accused of something that is wrong, is bad enough. But you and I know what's in here, don't we? I know what's in my heart and what's good and what I have to struggle with. And I can identify with the psalmist in Psalm 25, coming to the Lord more than one time. There's some painful memories there of bad decisions from time to time. You try not to make them habitually, but we do. We do sometimes. The important thing is to deal with and to own and to not keep on doing what you've been doing and making excuses for it. Verses 1 through 3, he says, "Examine me, O Lord. Vindicate me, O Lord, for I have walked in my integrity, and I have trusted in the Lord without wavering. Examine me, O Lord, and try me. Test my mind and my heart. For your loving kindness is before my eyes, and I have walked in your truth." So whatever it is that he's been accused of or about, he knows that it's inaccurate. And he begins with a plea to God to search his heart and confirm his genuineness. He uses a word that's been translated integrity. It's been translated blameless life. It's been translated a life without reproach. It's in English, the transliteration is a four-letter word, thom, T-H-O-M. In Mississippi, they probably say that, Clarence, tom, I had a friend, his name was Tom, but that's not what they call him. They call him Tom. The adjective form of this word is used as God describes Job in the prologue to his book as a man of integrity. And so sure is the psalmist that his heart is devoted, that he calls God to his witness. "Vindicate me, O Lord, for I have walked in my integrity." He wants the Lord to look at his character and divinely reinforce his own self-evaluation. He feels, he's absolutely convinced he's on solid ground about whatever this matter is. And he believes that his undivided commitment to God is going to stand, even the security of the Lord's searching eyes. That's... in other words, he knows that he knows, or he wouldn't be talking that way. He further states, "I have trusted the Lord without wavering." He declares to God that he has not deviated from trusting in him. He has been constant and immovable in his faith in the Almighty. And neither the circumstances around him nor the people who are opposing him have been able to pry him away from his devotion to God and his life in the Lord. Verse 2, he cries for this divine examination, and it becomes more intense as the prayer proceeds. "Examine me, O Lord. Try me. Test my mind and my heart." In verses 1 and 2, he uses four strong words. The word vindicate, examine, try, and test. To vindicate, or the King James Bible says judge, that's okay too. It means to look over and weigh a matter or a person. Examine suggests a refiner who assays his metal before purchasing it. Try indicates his plea to be put in circumstances that would put his faith into action. test illustrates placing him like gold in a smelter to get rid of any dross that is there, to remove that. The mind and the heart refer figuratively to his whole inner being, his feelings, his thoughts, his conscience, his will. So he asked God to look deep within him and judge the true spirituality of his heart. And he seeks the most complete test possible because he is thoroughly convinced of his own trustworthiness in these matters. And he believes that he's walked in unswerving obedience. Well, that's a good place to be, isn't it? If you know that you're clean on that matter, then you don't care who examines, come look, right? And so he's there. In verse 3, the psalmist identifies a twofold thrust of his life as God's covenant loyalty and truth. He says, "For your loving kindness is before my eyes, and I have walked in your truth." The Lord's grace, loving kindness, has been constantly before him. And as a result of that, he's committed himself to doing the Lord's will, of realizing who the Lord is and realizing his own commitment to keep God's truth. He believes that this divine inspection will validate his integrity. These words, to some, may appear almost arrogant and self-righteous, but they should be seen as a sincere, righteous man's desire for God to vindicate him of unjust accusations that have been made against him. If you were in that position, wouldn't you want that? If you knew you were not guilty, that you had maintained your integrity, that you had not violated the truth. One of the reasons I believe, I'm going to give you an opinion, but I think one of the reasons it's hard to get people to run for office in this country is they can just be assured that if people can't find something bad to say about you, they'll make something up. And there are just a lot of very fine people that just not going to do that. They're not going to participate with that because it's a charade. It's a farce. It's wrong. And, it should be. I have a style and libel manual. I've forgotten one of the big newspapers that put it out. And it had to do with libel. And here's the rule on libel, the way it used to be. If you call a man a monkey's uncle, you better be able to demonstrate that man is that monkey's uncle. Because if you can't substantiate what you say, then you are thereby liable. Now today, people, they say all kinds of stuff and get by with it. In the fairly recent past, brethren, that was not the case. You didn't do that. That book is not more than 20 years old. It was a standard that journalists used to use, of all people. A society sunk to a low place whenever, you can just say things like's happened to the psalmist. See, somebody's out telling things that are not true, and he wants God to examine him because he knows he's not guilty of that. I know that's a distressing place to be. And these words may appear, say, as almost arrogant and self-righteous, but they're not. It's a righteous man begging God to vindicate him from these unjust accusations. And he doesn't claim there that he's perfect, but he does claim to be faithful. He doesn't claim to be flawless, but he does claim to be a diligent servant of God. And he believes that he's free of false goodness, that he loves God, he finds his hope in the Lord, There was an old scholar by the name of W.O.E. Osterley with 3 initials. He's probably British. But he wrote this: for a man to recognize in a spirit of true humility that he is striving to live according to the will of God need not generate spiritual pride, but should be a source of sanctified joy. While on the one hand, to confess sin is a supreme duty of man, the recognition of his virtues, when rightly envisioned, is on the other hand to acknowledge the action of divine grace. So, he's hitting right at it. It doesn't necessarily mean a man's arrogant when he protests being lied to and about and maintains his integrity. True integrity demands one's practice match his profession. What you do and what you say need to match when people look at it, because people are going to look at it. Again, you get these examples that are out there. There's a fellow that got elected to Congress. They say that it looks like now he doesn't even have a college degree. I mean, he'd put stuff out there like, you'd think this guy was 9 feet tall, could run the 40-yard dash in 3 seconds. Just Superman. And it turns out it was all a big lie. Well, now he ought to have known, particularly since the side of the political aisle he claimed to be on, that he's going to get examined on that, right? And we've had some people that are pretty high in office talked about. One fellow said he graduated at the top of his class. He in law school and was dead last. He did graduate, but he wasn't a stellar student. And on, and occupies a really high office, and keeps telling it. Psalmist is not that man. His integrity is buttressed by the fact that what he says is actually true. In verses 4 and 5, he talks about a righteous refusal. I do not sit with deceitful men, nor will I go with pretenders. I hate the assembly of evildoers, and I will not sit with the wicked. Okay, so you weren't going to see him out at one of these ice houses. You weren't going to see him there. You weren't going to see him at the gambling place out east of town here with all the meanness that goes along with that. Having grown up around it, I can tell you that you don't just have gambling when gambling shows up. You got all the attendant vice that goes along with it, which is considerable. The writer moves from his life before God to his life before men. And he affirms, I do not sit with deceitful men, nor will I go with pretenders. Now, he's inviting investigation right there, isn't he? And he has been careful about his conduct, making sure that he does not engage in deliberate and prolonged friendship with deceitful, hypocritical men. He has not relished or desired their company. You can't trust them. You need to get away from them, you see, and he knows that. Vain persons is used in the King James translation. Vain is the opposite of reality, the opposite of truthfulness and right living. The word dissemblers, that's an old word in some of the old translations. King James, the ASV, the RSV, they all use that term. It's a perfectly good term. It's an old word for hypocrites, the people who hide from the public what's really in their heart. That's not this psalmist. Verse 5, revealing his heart, he declares, I hate the assembly of evildoers. Not only do I not hang around with it, I detest it. And we will stop right there with his detesting it and detest it right along with him and take up next week, Lord willing. Thank you